The eagle has landed.
Spooky.
Welcome back to another episode of A Little Off the Top with your hosts,
Hannah
and Noah. Thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, this week is
Halloween.
Or Reformation Day for
This
those.
is Halloween. This is Halloween.
Today we're gonna do a bit of a different episode. We're gonna do some spooky stories, but first, let's just talk about life for a little bit, and then we'll get into it after that.
So it is currently 8:30 p.m.
Right, 8:30 p.m.
on Sunday evening, and we just got back from Denver, Colorado.
Yep. We just got back from a weekend trip to Denver, Colorado, and we are now recording this, and then I am going to edit like the wind to get this ready for... it's going to take a little bit more editing than usual to get this together because we're going to do some spooky stories, like I said. But first, let's talk about our weekend. We had a really fun weekend. So
We did have a good weekend.
talk about it.
Am I coming too hot?
No, you're good. Just
Sorry.
go. Yeah.
So on Friday we left for Denver, and then Friday evening we went to something called The Magic of Jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah.
And it was a huge pumpkin patch with, I don't even know, thousands of carvings.
Tons. I mean, just so much.
I mean, they had murals made where they had a bunch of pumpkins like put in this frame.
Right,
and then different carvings, and the whole thing made a picture. So like there was basically a full body The Mandalorian, and they had Shaq and Donkey Kong and Mario, like so many really,
Master
really
Chief
cool.
from Halo. It was really cool. And then the light show.
Yeah.
Like they had the lights within all of the... Oh, and then on top of that, they had like face carvings of a ton of characters as well, and just like regular jack-o'-lanterns, and then like flowers and castles and
dinosaur
dragons
bones,
and dinosaurs,
like a T-Rex and a Stegosaurus and a Triceratops
and Veggie Tales and
VeggieTale pumpkins.
Yeah, that was great. But and then the light show that was cued to the music in different spots was really cool. And then they just had this one song that just kept repeating itself over and over and over again in some sections, and it was just like, and I was like, I'm gonna rip my ears off from that section. But it was cool. It was all very
in
cool.
His dreams that night.
Yeah. And then Hannah plays the videos as she's looking over the videos she made, and I'm like, if I have to hear it one more time, I'm gonna stand.
So that's what I do in the middle of the night when you're asleep.
No. That's not what you do.
That's like, why did Noah go crazy? Well, let me tell you the story.
No. I'm not going to go crazy. Not for that, at least. But we saw a couple of movies. Mm-hmm. One of them being
Saturday night.
Yeah, Saturday night. The other one, what I was going to talk about was at Alamo, at one of the Alamos. We've officially been to all 3 Alamos in the Denver area, which is very cool. They're all different, and they're all very cool. And at this one, we saw they were doing a showing of the 1954 film Creature from the Black Lagoon, which was so much fun. It was a lot of fun. There are so many monsters that have been inspired by the design of that character, for one.
Oh, 100%.
And then for 2, old movies. We have now watched recently, what was that movie we watched?
House on the Haunted Hill, or
House. Yeah, I think it was House on Haunted Hill or something like that. It's from the 50s as well. Old movies, a lot of nothing happens. Uh-huh. And then finally stuff happens, and it's like, and then a lot of nothing happens again. And it's because they were trying to make them long enough. And also the crowd was just like, it's moving pictures. So, they were just excited by that. So everybody from the 50s just talked like that, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's
oh my, it's moving pictures. That's right, darling. It's moving pictures. That's it. That's how it was.
That was the only 2 accents you could have.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been to the 50s. I know. Wait, we can't tell people that. I've never time traveled in my life. Anyway, I think today's going to be fun, but I will say this. If you are not into spooky, if you're not into scary, like, it's okay. There will be some comical, I'm sure. I'm sure we'll do some stuff that's stupid. But also, if you're not into it, totally understandable. Maybe share it with a friend who is into it.
Yeah.
But that's what we're going to do today. We're going to read some spooky stories and probably talk about them a little bit and, celebrate the spooky season right now. So let's get into the meat of the episode.
All right. Let's do it.
Welcome to A Little in the Dark, where the ordinary meets the eerie. I'm your host, Noah, and I'm joined by my lovely host, Hannah. And tonight we're venturing into a realm where shadows come alive, and every creak in the floorboard might just be something watching you.
In this space, we delve deep into the heart of fear, exploring tales that chill the bone and spark the imagination. Each story you'll hear tonight is not just a narrative, it's an invitation to confront the unknown and embrace the thrill of the unsettling.
We'll traverse haunted houses that seem to breathe, woods where whispers echo from dark, and encounters with spirits that refuse to let go. These tales, drawn from urban legends and personal experiences alike, will remind us all that reality can sometimes be far scarier than fiction.
So dim the lights, settle in with your favorite blanket, maybe even a flashlight, and prepare yourself for a journey into the macabre. As we gather around this virtual campfire, let your mind wander into the shadows. And remember, the night is full of mysteries, just waiting to be uncovered.
Are you ready to listen? If you dare. Well, that was dramatic.
But so much fun.
It was very fun. That was a lot of fun. I'm excited for this episode. And I'm not really into scary stuff, but I've gotten more into it as you have
Open your eyes a little bit to the glories of the spooky.
You've pulled me into it. There's still some stuff I will not do, but I'm excited. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah.
So
It's great to shake it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's a change up. We've never done something like this, really. So do you want to get into it? You want to read the first story?
Yep.
Okay.
So this is a Reddit post from Creepypasta, and the title of it is Isaac is Near.
Oof. That's already creepy.
Let's go. After the doctor nodded, I sat in the chair while he pulled out my file. Isaac Miller's. I took a deep breath and began to speak. Mirrors haunt me. I've never told anyone this before. I think, if I'm not mistaken, all this started when I was still little. I don't even remember how old I was or what happened very well. All I can remember are my mother's screams of terror and the agonizing heat I felt, burning, and the glass of my shower breaking and reflecting my disfigured face. Other than that, I don't remember anything else. I think after that, I was kind of always tempted to look at mirrors. They're kind of enchanting, you know? But, well, getting back to that incident, it happened before I realized it. I woke up in the hospital bed, screaming for my mother. When they removed the bandages from my face, I was completely different. The doctors, well, they looked at me shocked. But my mother told me that I was still her beautiful son as always. So I guess that's what matters. Oh, about what happened next? Well, that was way before you diagnosed me with schizophrenia. My mother told me to wear one of those simple surgical masks to school. She assured me it was nothing serious, but just to protect me from infections. But I guess as I grew up, I ended up understanding that none of the other kids wore one. So I ended up connecting it to my burns and wore it daily to the point that I only really took it off to eat or to take a cold shower. But that didn't stop the bullying, and that's why I wear this hoodie, to hide. Why? Oh, I just don't like to draw too much attention to myself, to tell you the truth. I don't have and honestly don't want many connections other than my mother. Oh, but I do have a friend, Nick. We know each other from school, and he often comes to visit me. He was supposed to come today, but honestly, you don't want to know about all that, do you? Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is about what I've been hearing. No, not about my classmates. It's the mirror. No kidding, I heard the voices again on Tuesday, and they were talking about the mirror. I had just gone to look at myself like I do every other day, but the noise, it became unbearable, and I ended up hitting my head on the mirror in a fit of rage. I don't know what happened, but when I woke up, my body was in a lot of pain, a horrible burning sensation, and I felt like my eyes were burning. I spent a few minutes trying to open them, but I could only open them a little. And I also smelled something that seemed to be chlorine? Like I had spilled bleach all over the place and passed out or something. My mom? Well, she panicked and asked why I dyed my hair white. I looked at her in surprise and said I hadn't done anything. I had just woken up. But my mom started scolding me, telling me not to lie, and that she found the bathroom completely wet with bleach and the bathroom mirror broken. And she quickly grabbed my arm to take me there, and just like she said, everything was exactly as she told me, or at least what I could see with my eyes narrowed in pain. And I swear, I had no idea how the heck this happened, doctor. And after that, I decided to go to bed. And I dreamed of something strange. I dreamed that I saw myself through the mirror with completely yellow eyes, and I heard a deafening static and woke up scared. And right after school, the usual happened. Nick came to visit me to play video games with me, a fighting game that we always played. And he also asked me the same question as my mother while we were playing, why I bleached my hair. But since I knew that he wouldn't believe me if I told him the truth, I simply told him that I wanted to change my look, to look like the character that I used in the game, and he seemed satisfied with my answer, joking that now all I needed to do was learn Kung Fu and I could consider myself a tournament champion. I laughed along with him, but deep down I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. Later, it happened again, doctor. When I went to sleep, I dreamed of myself with yellow eyes and static. But this time, there was something written on the mirror. Isaac is near. And in fear and anger from the nightmare, I broke the bathroom mirror and immediately regretted my choice. He, or rather I, ran after me, and then I locked myself in the first place I found, the back room, and grabbed a wrench. And when he opened the door, I attacked him, stabbing the wrench right into his head with one lunge. Then I ran to find my mother, and together with her, I ran out of the house and... Wait a minute, I said as I turned to look at my mother's body on the floor next to me, with a wrench stuck in her skull and fresh blood still gushing from the faceless figure with long fingers that extended his hand to me. You're not my psychiatrist, are you?
Jeez.
It gave me cold chills when I read it for the first time, so I was like, I need this.
That's so creepy. That's so creepy. Jeez
You're welcome.
Louise. I'm going to have a hard time sleeping after this episode now.
We'll watch something funny.
Okay. After I furiously edit this because we're recording this at 8:52 at night. Oh, I've got one for you called Stairs in the Forest.
Okay.
If you've ever spoken to anyone who's worked in the U.S. Forest Service, you've probably heard tales of the strange sights seen deep within the forests of the United States. One such sighting mentioned time and again by search and rescue officers is that of a set of stairs in the middle of the woods that seem to lead to nowhere. Each officer's stories vary in detail, but they've been all told countless times by supervisors not to speak of the stairs. And more importantly, they warn to never touch the stairs. One summer afternoon, you and a friend are backpacking through the forest. You're deep in the woods, miles into the wilderness and alone. As you walk, you see a clearing in the distance. In the middle of the clearing sits a staircase. Your friend is apprehensive, but you run ahead, curious to get a closer look. It's one of the strangest things you've ever seen. The stairs seem like they were ripped right from a new house and placed in the center of the forest. Each step of the staircase is covered in pristine white carpet, untouched and undisturbed by the nature that surrounds it. As if nature herself is afraid to come in contact with the steps. You go to approach the staircase, but something stops you. A feeling of dread, a feeling of paranoia, a thought in the back of your mind, this isn't right. I should not be here. Some force stronger than curiosity compels you to go up. You have to know. Each step higher shakes you to your core. You're shaking so badly you feel like you could stumble and fall at any moment. You take the last step and every sound drops. Have you gone deaf? You try with everything. You have to choke out a sound, but there is nothing but silence. You feel lightheaded and dizzy before your knees go out and everything goes black. When you wake, the stairs are gone. Your friend is nowhere to be seen. You start the trek home, and soon you find your friend who has no memory of the stairs and claims you just wandered off on your own for an hour or so. You vow never to mention what you saw and felt that day. And you try to convince yourself that it was all some heat-induced delusion, but deep down, you know what happened. You know somewhere, hidden within the brush of the forest, the stairs are waiting for you to find them again. Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Pretty good little one. Pretty good little one.
Yeah. All right. Mine's another one from Reddit.
Okay.
It's called The Unseen Neighbor.
Okay.
When I moved to my new apartment, I was excited. It was my first place after college, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The building was old, with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but it felt cozy. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, at least on the surface. I often exchanged pleasantries in the hallway, but there was one neighbor I never met. Apartment 3B remained a mystery. The door was always closed, and no sounds ever emerged from within. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow moving behind the frosted glass, but I never saw anyone come or go. I asked my other neighbors about them, but they would shrug and just change the subject, their expressions turning serious. "Just leave them be," one neighbor advised. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't want to disturb them." I brushed it off as a small-town oddity until one stormy night, curiosity, well, it got the better of me. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows, and I found myself staring at the closed door of 3B, the darkness behind it beckoning. My heart raced as I approached, a mix of fear and intrigue propelling me forward. I knocked softly. "Hello? Is anyone home?" Silence greeted me, thick and suffocating. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a faint shuffling from inside, like something heavy moving. I knocked again, more insistently this time, and waited. "Who's there?" A voice came from the other side, low and raspy. "I'm your neighbor from 3A, and I just wanted to say hi." There was a long pause before the voice replied, "Hi. Why?" I didn't know how to answer. Just wanted to introduce myself. It's nice to meet you." "Nice," the voice echoed, but it sounded hollow. "I don't get many visitors." Maybe we can talk sometime. I'd love to know more about you," I offered, trying to sound friendly despite my growing unease. "No," the voice hissed. "I don't think you should come back here." Before I could respond, I heard the sound of a lock clicking. The door creaked open just a fraction, and I was hit with a gust of stale air. I peered inside, but the darkness seemed impenetrable. I caught a glimpse of something. Was it a figure standing in the shadows? I backed away, heart pounding, the strange feeling that I had disturbed something deepening. Okay, no problem. Just let me know if you need anything. I hurried back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. My mind was racing with questions. Who lived there? What did they want? But over the next few days, I just tried to forget about my bizarre encounter. As the week dragged on, strange things began happening. My belongings would be slightly out of place. Once I found my favorite coffee mug in the hallway outside of my apartment. I chalked it up to my absent-mindedness, but the uneasy feeling in my gut just grew stronger. Then came the sounds. At night, I would lie in bed, unable to sleep, listening to rhythmic tapping coming from 3B. It was unsettling, like nails scratching against wood. I tried to ignore it, but it seeped into my dreams, twisting them into nightmares filled with dark figures and whispers. One night, unable to bear it any longer, I gathered my courage and knocked on the door again. This time, the tapping stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is everything okay?" A pause. Then the door creaked open. The shadowy figure of a person loomed in the darkness. Their face was obscured, but I could feel their eyes boring into me. "You came back," the voice hissed, filled with an unsettling mix of surprise and menace. "I just wanted to see if you were all right," I stammered, taking a step back. "You've been making some strange noises." A low chuckle echoed from within, making my skin crawl. "It's not my fault. They don't like it when I talk. They want me to stay silent." I could barely understand the words. Who wants you to stay silent?" "They come at night. They don't want you to know I'm here," the figure murmured. "They can smell you." My heart raced, a primal fear flooding my senses. "Who are you talking about?" Suddenly the door flung wide open, revealing the full extent of the darkness inside. I could see shapes moving, dark and shifting against the walls. I wanted to run, but I felt paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of that shadowy figure. "They want you," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "They've been watching you, waiting, just like they waited for me." In that moment, realization struck me like a lightning bolt. I turned to flee, but the figure lunged, grabbing my arm with a grip that felt like iron. "You can't leave!" it screeched. "You're already a part of them." With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched myself free and bolted down the hall. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. The sounds from 3B resumed, louder and more frantic, like a catastrophe of voices urging me to join them. I stayed up all night, terrified of what might happen next. As dawn broke, I cautiously peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Weeks passed without incident, but the dread lingered. I began to notice more missing items, small things at first, but they kept disappearing. My sanity frayed at the edges, and I knew I had to leave the apartment. The day I moved out, I caught one last glimpse of 3B as I hurried past. The door was slightly ajar, and a pair of eyes glinted in the darkness, watching me leave. As I drove away, I thought I was free, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, waiting, always watching. I never returned to that neighborhood, but sometimes at night when I'm alone in my new place, I can still hear a distant tapping, echoing in the back of my mind, a chilling reminder of the unseen neighbor who never truly let go.
Oof. Jeez Louise. Spooky.
There are some very creative people on that app.
Yeah, for sure. All right. You got another one for us?
Yeah.
Or I got one.
Okay.
This one, it's not as much of a story and more talking about some folklore. Okay? Folklore from Appalachia.
Woo.
The Brown Mountain Lights. So first, this is some lyrics from a bluegrass song called Brown Mountain Light. In the days of the old covered wagon, when they camped on the flats for the night, with the moon shining dim o'er the old canyon rim, they watched for that brown mountain light. High on the mountain and down in the valley below, it shines like the crown of an angel and fades as the mists come and go. This tale is one of mystery. The odd and alluring brown mountain lights are known as a supernatural phenomenon and have been the inspiration for many songs in folk music. The mysterious lights can be found in Burke County, North Carolina, in the Pisgah National Forest. For centuries, tales of these lights have been recorded, but no one has yet to uncover what is causing the puzzling event. There have been multiple versions of the lights' origin stories throughout the years. For instance, one legend stems from the native Cherokee people, where it's told that the lights are actually the souls of women who are searching for the men they had lost in a war on Brown Mountain. In the 19th century, another version of the story claims that the lights were the spirit of a young woman who was murdered by her husband. And in a country music song of the early 1950s, a version of the story tells us of a man who went hunting on the mountain and never returned home. In this legend, a slave was sent to search for the missing man, but neither were ever seen again. And the lights are said to be the light of the lantern used to continue to search beyond the grave. Even the U.S. Geological Survey investigated the myths surrounding the lights, and in 1922 they published an extensive report concluding that the lights were a combination of automobile and locomotive lights, light from natural brush fires, or light emitted from other explainable sources. While the study might be correct for the time, the legend does date back much further than the time of automobiles, and the lyrics in the song state, "In the days of the old covered wagon," leading one to believe the mystery may have been around much longer. Even though sightings of the lights are now a rarity, many people still flock to the mountains to try to catch a glimpse of the strange occurrence. So it's pretty weird. It's just a weird little folklore.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folklore to Appalachia.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's some really interesting stories. I was looking up some, and there's a lot of speculation to all the folklore, but it's really interesting. I know a lot of people probably know about this one, but I'll read this too because it's in the article. Beginning in 1966, a strange year of phenomena occurred in West Virginia and Ohio. It began with two couples who, while driving past an abandoned World War II TNT factory, saw a huge man-like bird with glowing red eyes flying parallel to their car. The creature had a 10-foot wingspan, and despite their attempt to flee, the car could not speed past the being, even while going over 100 miles per hour. After reaching the city limits of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the couples reported the sighting to the police immediately. Newspapers dubbed the creature the Mothman, and the story took off. Over the next year, the residents of Point Pleasant saw the Mothman at least 8 more times. Every time the description was eerily similar, a large man-like bird with huge red eyes. Many dismissed the phenomena, claiming that the hysteria was simply over a sandhill crane that had gone off its normal migration route. Despite skepticism, strange things continued to happen in Point Pleasant. UFO sightings increased significantly, and suspicious men in black were spotted throughout the hills surrounding the town. These peculiar occurrences continued until December 15, 1967, when the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed in the middle of rush hour traffic. 46 people died in this disaster, and some claim to have seen the Mothman at the scene. After the 1967 disaster, sightings decreased, but the legend of the Mothman remained. Though it remains unexplained, the Mothman has become a kind of mascot for Point Pleasant, where there is a Mothman museum and an annual Mothman festival in the autumn.
I don't know if it's in Point Pleasant, but there's a life-size statue.
Yeah, that's in Point Pleasant. Okay. There was a picture of it in the article.
I think it was a government experiment that got away from them.
Yeah. I wonder if I can find a Mothman scary story. You tell the next scary story. I'm going to do a little bit of looking.
Okay. I'm sure you can. That's a very well-known urban legend.
For sure.
All right. This one's kind of funny because, I used to work night shift at the hospital that I first started working at when I first graduated from college.
Yes.
And there was a tech there who swore up and down, and I believe that she believed this with her whole entire heart, that hospital was haunted, and that there was a little girl that she would see every now and then that always wore all white in the imaging department, because it wasn't always the imaging department.
Mm-hmm.
But this is called the night shift incident.
Mm.
About 5 years ago, I worked the night shift at a small hospital in the countryside. It was a pretty old building with narrow hallways and that distinct smell of antiseptic that never seemed to go away. I was a nursing assistant back then, and my job mostly involved checking on patients, handling paperwork, and running errands for the nurses on duty. Most nights were uneventful, just routine work, but one night, something happened that I can't explain, even now. It was a Tuesday night around 2 a.m., and the hospital was almost silent. We didn't have many patients, just a few older ones in the long-term care unit and a couple of emergency cases. I was doing my usual rounds, going from room to room, when I passed an empty room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, and as I walked by, I thought I saw a figure sitting on the bed, just for a split second. I stopped and stepped back to look. The room was empty. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, because I was tired. I continued my rounds, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up on me. But about an hour later, I heard the faint sound of shuffling coming from that same room. It was almost like someone moving in bed. A sound I had heard hundreds of times in the other rooms. I went back to check. The room was still empty, but the bed looked slightly rumpled, like someone had been lying there. The sheet was folded back, which I was sure wasn't the case during my last check. I felt a chill, but decided not to think too hard about it. The rest of the shift, I kept catching these small, strange things. A faint whisper from around the corner, the sensation of someone walking just behind me, even though no one was there. By 4 a.m., I was feeling uneasy and just wanted the shift to end. At one point, I went to the nurse's station to grab some paperwork, and an older nurse, Linda, noticed I looked tense. She gave me a knowing look and asked if anything unusual had happened. I hesitated, not sure if I should say anything, but eventually told her about the noises in the empty room. She listened quietly and then nodded and said, "That used to be Mr. Hansen's room." Linda explained that Mr. Hansen was a long-term patient who had passed away about 6 months before I started working there. He was an elderly man, friendly enough, but apparently very attached to his routine. He liked sitting up late into the night, reading or talking to the night staff, and after he passed, some of the staff mentioned they'd hear noises in his room or feel a strange presence, that they weren't alone in the hallway. I laughed it off, trying to shake off the tension, but the thought lingered in my mind. I didn't have any strong beliefs in the paranormal, but something about that night just felt off. I continued my rounds, and around 5 a.m., I walked past Mr. Hansen's old room. This time, I noticed something that made me stop cold. The light in the room was on. We always keep the lights off in the empty rooms to save energy, so I was sure it had been dark the last time I checked. I stood there staring at the light spilling into the hallway, my heart racing. I debated calling for Linda or one of the other nurses, but a part of me felt like I had to check for myself. I pushed the door open, stepped inside cautiously. The bed was made neatly, but the impression of someone sitting at the edge of it was clear. The sheets were pressed down in a way that shouldn't have been possible if the bed had been untouched. For a moment I just stood there, staring at that spot. The room felt colder than the rest of the hallway, like a slight chill in the air. I could hear or feel a faint, almost peaceful presence around me, like someone was just sitting quietly, watching. I didn't linger. I turned off the light, closed the door, and left. The rest of the shift passed in silence, and by the time the sun started to come up, the hospital felt normal again. I didn't mention the incident to anyone else, and I never heard anything more about Mr. Hansen after that. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a combination of exhaustion and suggestion, but a part of me can't shake the feeling that, just for a moment, Mr. Hansen came back to visit, keeping to his routine one last time.
That's creepy. Hospitals freak me out anyway.
Hospitals at night are terrifying.
Yeah.
When most of the lights are turned off and it's quiet.
Yeah.
Very terrifying.
Yeah, not into that. Not into that at all. Okay. So I do have a Mothman story.
All right, let's hear it.
I found one. And it is just titled Mothman. Perhaps you remember it, perhaps you don't. Either way, it doesn't matter. After all, I do. In the winter of 2011-2012, there was a string of people who disappeared without a trace on Newfoundland Island. They all lived in remote groups of about 20 people, barely qualifying as villages. They had all gone outside in blizzards, and everyone believed they had wandered off into a whiteout and got lost in the storm. None of their bodies had ever been found, and the fact that more than 2 feet of snow had fallen on top of the bodies didn't help. Anyway, on to the portion of our story that involves me specifically. I lived in a small community of about 37 people. One of the missing peoples was a member of our small hamlet. It was in one of the worst storms of that January, and despite our warnings, the man in question pushed past us like a man possessed, screaming something about the need for food and the needing to go up, and all save 5 of us never saw that man again. They were the lucky ones. By the 3rd day after he had left it was light enough and clear enough for us to go outside. We were in the middle of a valley surrounded by 2 high ridges, and the snow was about 4 feet high when we went outside. However, when we cleared away most of the snow from the single road going through the town, we saw that the snow was only that deep in the middle of the valley, and it was manageable on the mountains. Given his previous statement, we also thought that this was a reasonable place to begin looking. 5 of us returned to our respective homes to get mountaineering equipment and weapons. As we left the comparative safety of the village, we climbed up the mountain and were approaching the peak when suddenly something leaped out of nowhere onto one of the members of our troop. I pulled the .358 Magnum revolver from the holster I had strapped to my side and shot the creature from the back of my companion. The bullet went straight between the eyes of the Joker, and I could see that it was a wolf. The dead creature fell limply off the man as he stood up, shaking the snow off himself. I could hear the gunshot echoing between the walls of the valley. I knew I had made a mistake as soon as the corpse fell off him. There were waves of snow traveling at unbelievable speeds down the mountain towards us. The noise of the wall of snow falling was deafening, and I yelled to all to embrace for impact. I saw 2 of us swept away by the snow, and I hunkered down as I experienced a limbo like nothing anyone who has not been in that position could know. I had to keep my eyes shut as tight as I could. In the moments when I did open my eyes, all I could see was a blank white nothingness. I could hear nothing because my ears were filled with snow, and eventually I realized that the movement had ceased. I knew what I had to do in these circumstances, and I released my bladder and felt it move towards my feet. I breathed the silent thank you that it hadn't been the other way around. I heaved my hands around to my head, and I started to slowly dig upwards. Progress was slow, but I eventually clambered out of a small hole as the thick snow caved in behind me. "Hello?" I yelled despairingly. Suddenly, I noticed a flash of bright orange down the mountain about 500 yards away. It was Teller, a man from New York who had come and lived in the village for about 2 months. I didn't know much about him, but I liked him nonetheless. He was wearing a high visibility coat, and I was glad of it. He was waving and yelling, and I saw the avalanche rumbling on behind him. I put on the snowshoes and walked briskly towards him. I pulled him out of the snow and helped him put on his snowshoes. We decided to walk together on that same kind of level, looking for the other members of the group. Firstly, we found the body of one of the group. His airways were full of snow, and we decided he had suffocated. "Nasty way to go," commented Teller, "but I've seen worse." "How so?" I asked him. "I served in Vietnam, a medic, you understand." I was about to tell him I did when I saw something that caught my eye. There was a person lying on his side about 300 meters above us. I started up the mountain, Teller following me. It was Jackson, the 4th member of the group. He was unconscious but alive, and we sat there wasting precious time as we waited for Jackson to wake up. Suddenly he started coughing, and the lumps of snow came along with a small amount of blood. We trekked on for about another half an hour looking for the other 2 missing people we were looking for. It was getting dark, and there was the sound of wolves baying for blood, so we started down the mountain. It was discouraging, to say the least, having lost 2 members of our party and not having found the first missing person. That last point was about to change. The sun was setting behind the crest of the ridge when suddenly I saw a red tinge on the surface of the snow. I pointed it out to Jackson and Teller, and we started digging down through the snow. We only had to dig about 2 inches before we saw the lifeless, frozen face of Farmer, the original missing person. He was almost as white as the snow he lay on. If it wasn't as if he was just cold, it was more as if he had had the color sucked out of him. We excavated the rest of him and from the icy robes that surrounded him and discovered the gruesome fact of his death. His chest had been ripped open with inhumane strength, and his heart, which was clearly visible, was intact save for a single hole punched straight through into the middle of the organ. When we inspected the other wounds, such as the ones on his hands, defense wounds, Teller said they appeared to have been made with claws, and they were absolutely devoid of liquid blood. We knew that this couldn't have been done by any non-intelligent being. The wound on the heart and the fact that when the chest was ripped open there was no damage made to the heart confirmed this. But the wounds on the arms and the act of the sucking of blood from the heart seemed to deny that this was human. We were right. We knew that we couldn't take a body with us, and it was approaching complete darkness. We all had mag lights with us, and we all had weapons with us, a 12-16 shotgun, an M15 rifle, and my .358 Magnum. But we could see that whatever had killed Farmer had to take the flight option. We left Farmer's body skiing. We had chosen to change from snowshoes to skis after the light started to go, and we were now in the shadow of the opposing mountain wall, and we had to switch from our heavy handheld mag lights to smaller, less powerful LED headlamps. It was a horrific experience, and we could all feel the eyes of some all-seeing, malignant presence watching over us. Jackson wasn't looking where he was skiing, and he suddenly went over, tripping on a rock that was on top of the snow somehow, almost as if it had been placed there. As the light of his headlamp swung around, I caught sight of a creature. It leapt on Jackson, clawing at the arms he had put in front of himself. It reached towards its chest and caught hold of both Jackson's shoulders, and using a dexterous claw on its foot, not unlike that of a velociraptor, we watched in palpable horror as this beast used this to slit open the flesh in the middle of the chest and the sternum. With the immense bestial strength and a roar of animal rage, he thrust his hands inside the wound and pulled them away from each other, creating an explosion of blood, and leaned forward towards Jackson's still beating heart. I should probably back up for a moment and describe the creature. It was about 7 foot tall and had light gray skin stretched taut over its bones and muscles. Its eyes reflected in the light, and its claws on hands and feet. The claws on its hands were significantly smaller size than the talons of its feet, presumably to help maneuverability. But there were 2 things that made it even more frightening. Its mouth was like a rotting hole on his face, ragged at the edges with needle-sharp proboscis, which were revealed when one flap of ragged flesh was raised up. I have left, however, the most extraordinary feature until last. On his back he had 2 large wings, each bigger than me. They were like butterfly wings, but more drab, like a moth. Jackson was still screaming, and the proboscis of that wretched creature was still approaching the heart. Time seemed to slow down as I thought back about the missing peoples. I realized that the creature was responsible for the disappearance and the death of them all. They had disappeared every 3 days, which had to be how often he had to feed, and that was when I knew what I had to do if we had any chance of success against it. I reached for the holster strapped to my leg and lined up the sights on the .358 Magnum. I pulled the trigger on the revolver, and I shot Jackson in the heart. It screamed out and leapt at me. I shot off the 4 remaining rounds of my magnum. One of them must have hit his stomach or something as gallons of human blood spilt forth from the wound. The other 3 wounds oozed a translucent blue liquid. It tried to take off, but Tiller shredded one of its wings with a couple of slugs from the 12-16. I ran to Jackson, tossing away my magnum, and instead picked up the M15 rifle from beside Jackson. The beast, though injured, screaming with the last roar, and rushed Tiller. I shot the beast in the back, and a fountain of blue splattered Teller's face. It fell over, and Tiller stood up, looking down the barrel of the 12-16, and shattered the skull of the beast. We looked at each other, and in silence walked back down the hill towards the village. The next day, we went back to look for the bodies of all 4 people, and we found them all, but the body of the Mothman had disappeared. His blood was still there, and we sent samples of that to the lab. After the burials of the dead, I moved. Tiller had a job offer as a surgeon in Point Pleasant, and I decided to move with him. After all, I had no family there, and I wanted a fresh start. Besides, Tiller was my only real friend and the only one who would believe my story. But this was not the end. I figured that it has a level of telepathic power which it used to make the victims come to him, and he had a family. I think as he was dying, he sent an image of me and Tiller to his family, and I think they want revenge. But for now, they're happy just watching and waiting for the opportune moment.
Ooh, yeah. So
good.
More than just one
Yeah,
Mothman.
a family.
A family.
Moth. He's not just a Mothman. He's a moth dad. We got time for a few more here. And I got a fun idea.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of these. They're called 2-sentence horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, adjusting there a little bit. Basically, I give you a sentence, and then we try to come up with the second sentence that makes it creepy. It's a 2-sentence story, so it just gives like this eeriness to it.
Okay.
So I'll give the sentence, and then we got to come up with the second sentence. So the first one is, I knew it was a bad idea to go into the basement, but I had no choice.
I kept hearing this little girl crying in the darkness, and I had to investigate.
Okay. I knew it was a bad idea to go into the basement, but I had no choice. The tap, tap, tapping on the wall just kept drawing me nearer and nearer. Tap, tap, tapping on my window. Anyway. It was a dark and stormy night. She was alone in the house, or so she thought.
You can go first this time.
It was a dark and stormy night. She was alone in the house, or so she thought, until she heard steps right above her head in the attic.
Dang it, I was going to say something about until she heard. Until she saw what was the flicker of a figurine in the corner of her bedroom right before she turned the light on.
Okay. That's enough for that. That was creepy though. That was good. That was a good one. I have one that is another kind of long one. Mm-hmm. And then do you have another one?
Yeah.
Is it a pretty long one?
About the same length as the last one I read.
Okay. It says the estimated reading time of this next one that I have is 11 minutes.
Oh, mine's not that long.
Okay. So we'll do that, and then we'll do this one, and we may do one more after that, and we'll get into it if we do. Well, I'll talk about it more, but go ahead. You go.
All right. This one is called Sweet Meat.
Sweet meat?
Uh-huh.
Okay, just making sure I heard that right.
Yeah. One Halloween, a little girl named Kyra woke up and got ready for school. As she got ready for school, she wondered what was for breakfast. She could smell the aroma of pancakes being made in the kitchen. She enjoyed her breakfast, chomping down on the sweet, fluffy pancakes her mom made. Hurry up, we're going to run late, her mom, Olivia, said. Okay, Mom, I'm coming. Kyra replied. She threw her book bag on and ran out the door to get in the car as Olivia locked the door and got in the car herself. The school day seemed to last forever until the final bell rang, and Kyra ran to her mother's car. She excitedly waited to put on her fairy dress and wings to go trick-or-treating. Olivia told her only to go to the houses that have their porch light on because that means they're giving out candy. Kyra approached the first house, which had pumpkins on the lawn, skeletons and cobwebs in the trees, and a skeleton in a cloak with a bowl in its bony hands on the porch. As Kyra took some candy, the lights in the skeleton's eyes lit up red, and its hand reached out over the center of the bowl where Kyra's hand had been, and it let out an electronic scream. Terrified, Kyra ran to her mom for a hug. The next house had inflatables and projectors aimed at the house that cast little bats, witches, and other Halloween-themed icons. Kyra was scared at first, thinking the same thing that happened at the first house was going to happen again. Olivia reassured her that she was safe since there was no skeleton. With that reassurance, Kyra walked up and rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing happened. Kyra tried knocking. She was greeted by someone wearing a green mask with fins on the outside. Kyra jumped back but collected herself. She then said, "Trick or treat, give me something good to eat." And then she held out her little pumpkin bag. Kyra continued as she went from house to house, running up to their doors. Halfway through the night, Kyra's bag was getting so heavy that Olivia told her that she would hold on to her candy in a pillowcase. As Kyra dumped her candy in the pillowcase, she saw something move fast between the shadows through the houses. Thinking it was just another trick-or-treater, she continued going from house to house. At the end of the night, they arrived home to dump their candy in a bowl. They ate one handful of candy and stored the remaining 2 handfuls in Kyra's room for later eating. As Olivia tucked Kyra into bed, she told her not to eat too much candy because she would not be able to sleep. Kyra, who loved sleeping, immediately stopped so she could have fun in her dreams. The next night, she started eating more candy than she had hidden in her room, and as she was going to sleep, she heard a faint voice chanting, "Eat more, eat more, eat more," over and over. Kyra ignored it, thinking it was just herself. The next night, Kyra ate more candy. She could not go to sleep and started jumping up and down on the bed until Olivia came into the room from the loud creaking sounds. Olivia told her to stop and go to sleep, but she just couldn't. So Olivia sat on the bed and told Kyra to lie down. Olivia explained to Kyra that if she ate too much candy during the 3 nights after Halloween, a monster would get her. The monster looked like a skinny snake with a dimmed red jack-o'-lantern face and wrinkly purple skin. Olivia finished her story and kissed Kyra on the forehead before going to bed. Yeah, go ahead and terrorize the child and then tell her to go to bed.
Yeah, right?
Kyra was so scared that she almost did not sleep that night. But then the sugar crash came in and she drifted off to sleep.
Nice.
Then on the 3rd night, she heard a voice in her head that told her to keep eating candy while she was at school. Kyra tried her best to block it out by listening to her classmates, but it kept growing louder and louder until she started eating candy like crazy. When school was over, Olivia came to pick Kyra up. Then Kyra heard the sound of leaves crunching under a snake's rough belly and looked around quickly, but could not see anything. Then she told Olivia that her story was true, shoving some chocolate in her mouth after she said it. Olivia asked her, "Have you been eating candy all day?" She took away her candy and then reassured her that the story was fake, so Kyra would stop eating so much candy. Then she ran to bed, hiding under the blankets, dropping all of her school supplies. As she ran up as the sun was setting, she had a hard sugar crash and went to sleep. The next morning, Kyra's bed was ruffled and her window was open. She was nowhere to be found. Olivia called the police to report a missing person. 3 weeks later, the police presumed Kyra dead. Olivia found out that there were 5 other cases that started on the 4th day after Halloween. The police found one body with no muscle in it and its skin peeled in a banana style and its head resting next to it.
Jeez.
And that's the end of the story.
Oh my goodness. That's so creepy.
I think some people need to get checked on.
Yeah.
Someone needs to check on them.
I agree. I agree very much so. All right. I have one here. Sorry, I'm doing editing on the fly of things because like we said, we're doing this at the 19th hour. All right. This one is called The Worms Crawl In. Dusty Creek was a dried up old town. It had been small since its inception and smaller still since the draft had begun. You could run into everyone you knew within the space of one hot afternoon, and by God, you knew everyone. You knew friends and you knew enemies, and from day to day it was hard to tell the difference. At least this was the case for young Billy Monroe. Billy was a washed-out, pale-haired 11-year-old boy, the runt of a pack of 4 local lads. The 4 boys, all roughly the same age, generally ended up playing together, not because of any particular fondness of each other, but rather that in a town of that size, beggars could not be choosers. Because of this, the line between play and bullying was a vague and often unimportant concept. The boys usually merged together in the town square. There was nothing to draw them there other than convenience. No butcher, baker, or candlestick maker, just a grocery of dwindling stock and unfrequented haberdashery and some faded posters advertising the benefits of a victory garden, a hopeless endeavor in Dusty Creek, and a woman declaring that we can do it, equally hopeless as there was nothing to do. They had passing phases of interests, and generally led by the whims of one Caleb Jacobs, a medium-sized freckle-faced boy who was the unspoken leader of the pack. One month it was jacks, another month cards, though this was quickly put to an end by the hen-like ladies passing by, convinced that the boys were playing that morally corrupting game called poker. After that, there came pirates, followed by jungle adventurers. These phases would always come on suddenly, only to snuff out just as quickly. All, that is, except marbles. Who knows why marbles was a permanent fixture of the group? It simply was. A game could break out at any time, so the boys always carried their leather sacks of marbles. They generally didn't play for keeps, as the boys wished to hold on to their own meager collections, though Caleb could sometimes convince them to risk losing their cherished marbles with a rough and condescending tone. Billy Monroe was especially attached to his collection, or rather to a single large shooting marble. It was a true prize, a two-color spiral snake marble with twists of oxblood and pearly mint coiling just under the clear glass surface. It was miles above the other simple, single-colored agates and scavenged ball bearings. It was a hot afternoon, just like every afternoon, when Caleb declared a game of marbles. It was with some judicious browbeating. He was also able to persuade the pack into playing a game for keeps. A playing circle was quickly scratched into the dirt, and the boys were now carefully choosing which of their own marbles they might be willing to sacrifice. When Billy Monroe pulled his jewel of a marble out of his sack, he gave the marble a comically exaggerated kiss for good luck before nestling the treasure beside him in the sandy soil, well outside the bounds of the circle. Roy Jones, a broad, thick-lipped boy with hands the size of pan lids, sneered at him. "Why'd you keep that old shooter even though you never use it?" he drawled. "Doesn't make sense." "What are you talking about?" said Billy. "I use it all the time." Roy clicked his tongue. "You know what I mean, when we play for keeps like we're doing now." "Well, it's lucky. It's always been lucky. No sense in the world sending you some luck if you're only going to give it back away." Roy pouted. "I'm just saying, it's not fair that you use that shooter when we play for keeps. You don't." Billy scowled. "How is it not fair? I'm not breaking any rules using a different shooter. We can use whatever we want, right, Caleb?" Caleb nodded sagely, leading to a round of snickering. "Roy just wants it for himself," laughed Matt, a black-haired string bean of a boy. "I don't think you'd risk that marble either if you had it, Roy." Roy huffed at this call-out. "That's bullcrap and you know it," he growled. "Who would want that fussy old marble anyway? It's just a stinking snake marble. Who wants those?" Roy grinned darkly at his new train of thought. "Know what?" Roy jeered. "I bet those aren't even snakes. You know what those colory bits look like to me? Worms. Wriggly, crawly, slimy worms." Roy barked a cold laugh. "Do you love worms that much, Billy? Like your Gramps? I bet your Gramps loves worms. Come home covered in them from shoveling warm food all day. Just can't get enough of them. Old Man Monroe, Billy's grandfather, was the local gravedigger, a taciturn, long-faced man who seemed more at ease among the silent dead than his neighbors. "Why do you keep itching for this dang marble then?" said Billy. "I thought you hated worms, or maybe you want to eat it. Can't forget that yummy sandwich. Does Roy want a little snack?" "Stop it," Roy spat through gritted teeth, yet even as he spoke his insides spasmed. Roy's stomach couldn't help but roil at the memory, and the other boys laughed richly as he burned red from anger and embarrassment. Last spring, the group had chosen to bring lunch pails to school in order to play jacks during the midday break. Caleb had to offer Roy half of his ham sandwich, knowing that the quickly bulking boy couldn't refuse a chance at rationed meat. Roy had eagerly chomped off a large, ravenous bite. Within one chew, Roy realized that he had been bitterly deceived as a slimy, earth-tasting paste gummed itself between his teeth. He dropped the sandwich, and as he gazed down, he saw bits of worm fall onto his chest and stomach, and the sandwich contents writhing and wriggling where they lay. He'd screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the entire square, from the busy shopkeeper to the hen-hatted ladies, and even to Old Man Monroe shuffling around doing his rare errands that required personal interaction. With some deep breaths and a careful swallow, Roy brought himself back to the present. The churning in his stomach morphed into a burning, bilious fire. "Well, that marble didn't do your paw any good, did it?" he hissed. "That lucky marble, I'll bet it's cursed. I bet your old Gramps hates himself for giving it to him." "It's not cursed," shouted Billy, his face scrunched up in red. "And it was lucky. At least Pa came back to be buried in one piece. That's more than you can say for your uncle," he jeered. "Bet he wasn't even blown up. Bet it's a lie that he ran off with some French floozy." Roy launched himself at Billy, punching him square in the jaw. It took a moment for Billy to recover, but he quickly hunched over and drove his shoulder into Roy's stomach like some kind of crazed berserker. The movement forced a spat of bile up into Roy's mouth, and he gagged as he fell onto his rear. The rest of the boys burst out laughing. Okay, settle down, guys," said Caleb after he had had his fill of derisive mirth. "Roy, you shouldn't have said that about his marble, and Billy, you shouldn't have said that about his uncle. Truce, okay?" Billy toed the ground. "Yeah, I guess." "Roy?" Roy was still coughing on the bile in his throat. "Well, whatever. Come on, guys. Let's get away from here. Let's get out of here." As the pack shuffled away, Roy had managed to right himself. He brushed dirt off of his face with the back of his hand. "I'll kill you, Billy Monroe. I'll kill you," he growled. A week had passed, and another game of marbles had begun. All resentment over the arguing seemed to have been erased and written over with other petty squabbles and name-calling. The pack was once more gathered in the square, squatting by a circle of iron railing meant to protect the scorched and withered sapling inside of it. The railing was being used as a makeshift prison camp, a mighty fortress housing sun-bleached clothespins POWs. Their comrades had planned a rescue, but sadly they had all collapsed on the field of battle when Caleb demanded a game of marbles. What's more, another game for keeps. The boys reached for their leather sacks and emptied their contents onto the dirt. Once more, Billy took the beautiful marble and gently placed it at his side, safe and sound. The bitterness that Roy thought he had forgotten bubbled up, and he grabbed the marble where it lay, nestled next to Billy. "You're going to use it this time. Show us just how lucky it is." Billy squealed, grabbing at Roy's wrist for the marble, which he held aloft. When the side of Billy's fist planted itself into Roy's chest, he lost himself completely and shoved Billy hard. What happened next was an accident, a solid plant, perhaps accompanied with a thump on the head, then running off in tears. And that should have been the end of it. That was supposed to be the end of it. But the luck of Billy's marble soured that day. In one stumbling step back, Billy's foot landed on the cluster of marbles, sending himself careening into a violent arch. In his fall, Billy struck the iron tree guard and landed in a heap on his side. The boys were still laughing, and as their guffaws turned into big huffs of steadying breath, they began to wonder of Billy's stillness. "Billy," said Caleb, "stop playing possum. You can get up now, Billy. Don't be such a baby." The commentary hushed as they noticed a trickle of blood coming from his ear, and soon another streaming down his nose. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They could only watch as Billy lay lifeless. His skin, shirt collar, and even the soil around him became stained with red. The shopkeeper was the first adult to notice, as he'd seen the fight and had stomped down the square to break it up. Upon seeing the scene before him, he let out a loud yell. A commotion soon started, with some people shouting about the need for a doctor and others shaking their heads over the mysterious whims of the good Lord. As the adults crowded in, the boys were pushed away as the empty and dumb as the body crumpled on the ground. A brief inquiry had been held, and while Roy was subjected to the stern looks and long-winding scolding of the town doctor, it had been decided that Billy had died by misadventure. 2 days later, the town gathered to see Billy off to his final resting place. Old Man Monroe was not rich, thus Billy's coffin was a simple pine wood box. The large nails splintered the wood around the place they had been hammered in, contributing to a vaguely warped and weak appearance. Monroe sat next to it, a gentle hand resting against it protectively as his neighbor's rusted old cart, used in the place of a hearse, trundled down the dark road to the graveyard, the dirt road to the graveyard. Men had their hats off, women daintily dabbed at the corners of their eyes with their handkerchiefs. Children were there as well, many of them bored and confused. Roy was standing next to Matthew, the weakest of the group now that Billy had passed. "I don't see why we need to stand here and watch," muttered Roy with a scowl. "I mean, we already know he's dead. Why do we need to look at his box?" "It's respectful, I guess," mumbled Matthew, though he seemed unsure in the face of Roy's strong opinion. Roy suddenly grinned. "Hey, Matt," he whispered conspiratorially, "look what I got." Roy opened his clenched hands to reveal Billy's spiral snake marble. Matthew gasped. "Roy," he hissed in a frantic whisper, "you can't keep that." "What do you mean? You should give that back to Old Man Monroe. It's important to him." "You're talking horse crap," hissed Roy. "It's not like he plays marbles. He's too busy messing around with worm food all day." "But," Matthew said weakly, "it belongs to your family." "Not anymore, Matthew," said Roy. "I grabbed it fair and square." "Wait, did you take it when he died?" "Sure," Roy shrugged. "He wasn't going to use it anymore." Matthew's mouth hung agape. "What's the big deal? He was already dead. There wasn't anything we could do to help him." "I mean, sure, I guess, but still." "You gonna squeal on me?" "No," muttered Matthew, eyes downcast. "That's what I thought." There was suddenly a commotion. The wheel of the old cart had hit a rock. The rickety old thing broke. The coffin slipped from the suddenly tilting floor, causing a splintery dent at the head. Amid the panic and concerned shouts of the adults, and Old Man Monroe gazed helplessly into the crowd, Roy simply threw his head back and laughed. The marble twinkled in his hand. Some days had passed, and Roy found himself alone in a small attic room. Watery moonlight streamed through the window, and outside there was nothing to hear but the chittering cicadas and the occasional mournful hoot of an owl. His mother would whip him if she knew that he hadn't gone to sleep yet, but she was visiting her sister the next town over, and Roy simply couldn't stop admiring his ill-gotten treasure. He cradled it in his palms, feeling the slight cold chill of the glass, warm as he absorbed its heat. He held it in one hand, opening it flat so that the marble could roll gently over his skin. He held it between his fingers, angling it into the moonlight, thrilling at the rich glow of the colorful snakes inside. Roy was only dimly aware of the heavy flap of wings and a sudden lull in the cicada cries, but his attention was soon grabbed when he heard a noise alien to his usual experience. It was a faint, metallic snick. What sound could that be, he wondered. It seemed to have come from outside. He pressed his face against his window. The glass became damp under the steam of his nose. At first he found nothing amiss, but then he saw something that made his heart drop. From his perch he could just make out the flung-open cellar doors, the rusted old chain which kept the doors closed usually flung carelessly aside. As Roy puzzled blankly over this oddity, he heard a sudden creak in the floorboards downstairs. His blood chilled, and for a long time he remained frozen. The steps continued, each tread sending a new shiver of panic up his spine. His hand began hurting, and he realized that he was clutching the marble so hard that his nail beds had turned white. He stared at the marble in horror as a sudden realization came over him. The marble. It must be the marble. Billy had come back for it. How soon would it be before he ascended the stairs and crept into his room? All manner of folk tales and ghoulish myths flooded him. Within a few minutes, though, the tread ceased. Billy knew where his room was and would know where to look for him. Roy swallowed hard as he realized that he needed to make an escape. Roy winced at the creak of his door hinge, poking his head out carefully. He didn't see anything in the cramped hall. He carefully walked down the stairs, counting 10 heartbeats before silently shifting his foot onto the next step, a process which was faster as his heart rate began to rise. There wasn't any apparitions or ghostly moans. Maybe he could make it. He could go to the neighbor's house and say there was a snake. He reached the bottom of the stairs. Roy held his breath until it burned, attempting to guess at which floorboard would creak the least. He eventually screwed up his courage and pressed his toes forward, preparing for a whip crack to sound in his ears. Roy was puzzled when no betraying sound came, but then horrified when he realized why. Instead of hitting the bare wood he expected, Roy had stepped into a squish of soft ground. A freezing coil of terror slithered up his spine as he tried to identify the substance. All manner of wild, nightmarish guesses sprang to mind, but it was a patch of watery moonlight by an uncurtained window that revealed the truth. Soil. Once the realization hit, it was followed by an overwhelming stench. Somehow fear had blocked it from him, but now was practically holding Roy's face into it. It was dead earth, a sickening combination of wet stone and rotting weeds. Roy's eyes roamed helplessly, and a pale wash of moonlight revealed the true horror. Trails of dank soil led all over the house, chunks of it, skids of it, all of it reeking of the grave. Roy started to cry. "I'm sorry, Billy," he wept. "I'm sorry. Here, you can have your marble back. Is that what you want? It's yours. I'm sorry." He held out the marble into the shadowy emptiness in cup-trembling hands, hot tears dripping down his cheeks. A dark, dirt-covered shadow rose over him. Roy gasped, burning and dry, just before a shovel bashed over his head, stamping out his short, miserable life. Old Man Monroe trod silently up the path to the graveyard. He was a strong man, and his burden was light on his shoulders. He soon reached his goal, a yawning hole rimmed with damp earth. Monroe was used to moonlight and had decided not to use a lantern. He gently slid down the side of the hole, gingerly placing his feet between the wall of wet earth and the pine wood box before removing the loosely nailed lid. "Here you go, Billy." The old man slid the marble into a gap between Billy's stiff fingers, so that he appeared to be fondly holding it close. To the old man, it seemed that a small smile briefly ghosted over Billy's lips before resuming their restful state. He carefully climbed out of the hole after gently placing the lid back on, then once more scattered dirt onto the coffin with somber serenity. He did not fill it up, however. There was yet one more thing to be done. He roughly tossed a bloody mass into the hole. It was Roy, his mouth agape, his brain spilling out his broken skull. The man reached into his pocket, ready to give another treasure. Worms. Worms everywhere. He'd spent hours plucking them from the damp earth, cooing at them with promises of a grand feast. He scattered them all over the entire length of Roy's body. Already they were wriggling and poking at the still warm flesh, with one particularly curious specimen slowly burrowing into the pink pulp on his scalp. As a final touch, the old man stuffed a handful into Roy's open mouth. He spit upon the corpse, then cackled with a final departing message. "Enjoy your meal, Roy."
Goodness. Goodness.
What a story, right?
What a story.
What a story.
Wow.
That was a long one.
That was a long one.
That was a very long one. Well, you want to call it here? I think we've been going for long enough. I think there's enough spooky for us. For everyone.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, don't steal kids' marbles, and don't push them over, don't go in the stairs in the woods, and don't. What else? Don't break the mirrors, and know who your therapist is. And there's probably more lessons to be had here, but that's going to do it for another episode of A Little
Off the Top
with your hosts,
Hannah
and Noah. And this episode being called A Little in the Dark.
That's right.
Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, this is a lot more dark than we usually go. But again, we just read some scary stories for spooky season. But if you enjoyed it, rate us 5 stars. Share it with your friends. If you did enjoy it, what do they do, Hannah?
Just keep scrolling. Just ignore it.
That's right. There's so many podcasts out there. What's one more to ignore, right?
Right.
Anyway, that's going to do it for another episode of A Little Off the Top. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.